Well, I'm preaching this morning on a very rich topic. It's a topic close to our hearts in this political season, and a topic, I think much more importantly, that people of faith and Christians in particular have lots to speak about. So, as you might have guessed from the passage in some ways, the topic for the morning is freedom. And we Christians see freedom as a living, breathing, active force in our lives because of our theology, because of our spirituality, and because of the examples of our faith. I don't know about you, but I find that very exciting, this sense that there's something around us that lifts up this theme. And my point this morning is going to rest on three prepositions. For it's really how you modify this word, freedom, that reveals its dynamism and power and its truth. The prepositions that you choose will reveal to you how deep, sustaining, and spiritual your view of freedom actually is, and how you can show up in the world. Well, perhaps like you, I've been thinking about freedom for lots of reasons this year. But I have a particular reason as well. Since Betsy and I returned a month ago from a trip to Munich, Berlin, Dresden, and Prague. I have to confess, I was feeling this feeling of dread going to this part of the world at this season because of its history. But I was surprised by my reaction to what we saw, actually. Yes, it's certainly a place with a cautionary tale to tell, both Soviet and Nazi, but there was something much more by actually going and being in those two countries. They helped me think of freedom politically and spiritually at the same time. Politically and spiritually at the same time. Well, the cities we saw had known powerful oppression in the past century. Munich was the beer hall putsch, the concentration camp Dachau, the early rise of Hitler. Berlin, 45 years of Soviet rule split right down the middle, overshadowed by the Stasi and the culture of spying on your neighbor. Dresden, one of the last theaters of World War II, completely destroyed by Allied bombing. And then Prague, which was suppressed by Soviet tanks in 1968. I was awed by this history, but I found within the history many stories of spiritual freedom. So I'm going to show you a set of pictures. There we go. Here's the first one. I'll start with Prague. In many ways, the place that had the theme of resistance and freedom. So this is a statue right in the very center of the old city. Jan Hus, a church reformer, much in the spirit of Martin Luther, but before him, who was martyred for his assertion that all Christians are equal, his criticism of corruption in the church, and his belief that all preaching should be directed to the people and in the language they can understand. And then, second image, this is St. John of Nepomuk. And he was executed by drowning in the Vltava River. This is the river that this pedestrian bridge with this lovely plaque leads you over to the palace and the cathedral. But it's interesting. This would have made a good made-for-TV docuseries. He was martyred by the order of the king, apparently for not revealing what his wife, the king's wife, the Queen of Bohemia, had revealed in her confessional. Think of how thick that is. Interesting. Next slide is Dresden. And this is the Frauenkirche, the great Lutheran cathedral right in the center of the town. This, of course, collapsed in the bombing. And all the fire, all the structures inside burned and it collapsed. And when you go back to look at it, completely rebuilt, it's speckled with dark stones that are the stones colored by the fire. We'd have to enlarge it for you to see it well, but that's the beauty of that building in many ways. Let's take the next slide. All right. Now, this is in the GDR Museum, the museum about the time when East Germany and East Berlin were under Soviet rule. And this is called The Kiss. It's Erich Honecker and Leonid Brezhnev in 1979 professing their brotherly love for each other. And that's Betsy, of course, looking behind just to see what's really back there. And here's another take on the same kiss. Kind of a fun. This is a piece of the old Berlin Wall that was saved. And let's look at the other image from that wall. Image of peace. And I look at Berlin as the freedom to apply sustained pressure and then to find it gives way. Things give way. And finally, one rather severe image from Munich. Okay, this is a statue in Dachau. But the interesting thing about Munich and Dachau is that all 8th graders are required to go and see the camps to graduate. It's not possible to graduate if you have not seen the history. I found that beautiful. The freedom to remember. So the freedom to resist, the freedom to love and rebuild, the freedom to apply pressure, the freedom to remember. Truly the greatness of a nation is the greatness of its spirit, its courage to see and act on the truth, and more than that, its heart in the face of oppression. Well, our text this morning brings forward the 3 prepositions, I've got to watch that, prepositions concerning freedom that Paul is focused on. Of all of Paul's letters, this is the letter about freedom. It's the important theme for Paul. Paul is writing his letter against what's called the circumcision party, a group that believed it was necessary for new Gentile conversions to the Christian way to also become Jews in the process, including circumcision for men. To become a faithful Christian, you had to undergo this next step, this other step. And Paul had been so driven by his own Jewish identity that when he became a Christian, a follower of Jesus, he felt this incredible release, kind of like walking through the Berlin Wall one day. It was that kind of enormous freedom. And he was so impressed with the freedom and joy he experienced that he had to explore the radical twist that put in his own theology. And that comes up in this letter. You see, for Paul, nothing is needed for us to be right with God but God's love exhibited on the cross. Really, the focus on nothing. In other words, we don't bring something to God in effort. We come to God to receive a gift. All pride, all achievement, all identity issues, all that we are, is brought to a profound peace at the foot of the cross. God converts the heart from anxiety to peace and provides a freedom nothing else can offer. And so the circumcision party was a distraction and a problem. It was degrading this insight. So Paul was incredibly passionate about this covenant, this relationship with God, this bedrock idea in Jewish faith and now in Christian faith, that relationship is the heart of what we are all about, and that the laws and regulation of that relationship are just that. They're not the heart of it. And we can forget what the heart is. Betsy and I just saw a funny play at the ART called Two Strangers Carry a Cake Across New York. Now, the heart of this play's humor and drama is something a little like this distinction. Dougal is a young Brit, someone who's grown up on every movie based in New York City, and is so excited to be in New York City. But He's here not to be a tourist, but to attend a wedding. His father, who left the family before Dougal was even born, has invited him to come to his wedding. So he's here for this one reason, to connect with his dad. But to hear him talk, at least in the beginning of the play, he's just all swept up in the razzmatazz of New York City. And so the surface stuff threatens to overwhelm his trip's meaning and hope and purpose. Well, it's kind of a funny illustration for this letter from Galatians, but I do think it captures, perhaps quite powerfully, the ways in which the surface of things, the razzmatazz of things, can distract us from what the heart of what we're doing, what we're all about. And so for Paul, Jewish practices, not the practice of faith, but the practices of the faith, especially for these new converts, could be the razzmatazz, the problem. A poor substitute for the wonder and substance of God's covenant of love and the feeling of freedom that Paul knew about in his heart. This covenant of love, established with Abram and his followers, established again through Jesus. And thinking of this play, Dougal is in New York City to meet his dad, not to go ice skating in Rockefeller Center. And people are coming to faith not to be swept up in religious practices, but to find the heart of the relationship with God that has always been promised. So Christian freedom, we're going to get to the prepositions in a minute, is the freedom to live without fear, and thus to live for others, to live with purpose and love. And if you follow Paul's arguments, it kind of moves in this way. He says, you and I are freed from the Jewish law, and he means the externals, the fear, the sense of judgment, so we can experience freedom for relationship with God and others. And to know God and live with God is the greatest freedom, the greatest joy. It's to be led by and filled with God's Spirit. So here are Paul's words again. By contrast, the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. There is no law against these things. He's saying we've been freed from something so that we can be free for something. And I would add as well, free with someone. So these are the prepositions that modify this word freedom. Freedom from the overthrow of tyranny, in this case the tyranny of the human heart that wants no law, no constraint. The freedom for, and Paul says we're free to even be servants to others. And finally, more than duty and virtue, a sense of relationship, freedom with others, a covenant fulfilled. So I couldn't help thinking of this movement back and forth as we were in Europe traveling and seeing grace at work in a nation or nations. Freedom from, a profound value, one to be grateful for when the king is singing, "You'll be back, soon you'll see, you'll remember you belong to me." So Prague sings this song in Berlin, and of course we celebrate with fireworks ourselves. But interestingly, before, during, and after all of that is the freedom to do something. It's interesting that pressure can reveal to us the freedom that lies within, the freedom for. The ability to know freedom as a deeply internal conviction. And when this is married to a sense of service, when you can do something with that, it's a power that we see as divinely given. Now, I like to think of freedom for and with as a solvent. It's a way of dissolving so much of the discontent of these days, the name-calling and finger-pointing, the pop-up house of fear that we all want to build and which we resist, hopefully, at each turn. but the solvent to that. And Paul says this clearly. He says, "For you were called to freedom, brothers and sisters, only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for self-indulgence, but through love become enslaved to one another." Well, our third preposition is not just freedom from and not only freedom for, it's the freedom with. It's a kind of heart freedom, the capacity to identify with others and to let them know you identify with them. It's the heart of covenant, this beautiful vision that began with Abram, has continued all through the Scriptures, all through our Christian faith. It goes beyond virtue and even civic-mindedness. It's born in the stable of humility. The ego, the self, that has been reduced in size begins to have the capacity to think with, feel with, and act with others. So we're deeply humbled by the Jewish notion of covenant and its Christian expression, and we see our actions as resting on the suffering and loving God who released us from human defensiveness by standing in for us and loving us at our worst. We release control and offer it back to God and to others and experience a conversion of the heart. Well, our heart can be an empty space. When I hear the word freedom, I always associate with Janis Joplin's scratchy voice. I won't try to sing this time. Freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose, right? Yeah, lose. Which I discovered in looking this up was a Chris Christopherson song she was covering. And it was really a song about the emptiness of breaking up. And Jesus said poetically and prophetically, when a person is purged of a demon, that person better fill their house with something better, or else the demon will go out and find demon brothers and move back in. So our heart must be full of the vision of freedom. Freedom for others, freedom for community, freedom for service, freedom for God's vision of the world. I have a good friend who, since 1997, has been traveling to Nepal to build a school in a remote part of the country. His church was invited by a church in Nepal to come and do this. And the vision they formed together was of a school that would rival the quality of education in Kathmandu. And so for almost 30 years, John and his wife Ellen, with partners, have traveled to Trishuli, Nepal, to coach and encourage local leaders to build this school on an educational method that isn't rote memorization. And today, there's a lovely, serviceable building that stands as evidence of the vision of that education beginning to take root. And John will tell me how hard it is to shift ways of teaching and thinking. At 80, John still feels he can make this trip, although his friends wonder sometimes. But when I ask him why he goes, he says that his Christian vision is of a faith that makes others richer in all ways. Another way to phrase this is freedom with, the covenant that celebrates humility and freedom, and the freedom to work with others and with God's Spirit. In 1787, Benjamin Franklin, writing to two French intellectuals, said, "Only a virtuous people are capable of freedom. As nations become more corrupt and vicious, they have more need of masters." Well, Paul is here to argue us away from that ledge. But more than that, I think, to inspire us and to fill us and to give us hope. So what might be the day-to-day application of this progression of prepositions? The movement of freedom from, to freedom for, to freedom with. I would suggest that we focus on an idea each day, and that is that freedom is a gift. You might make a journal for the month of July and note the moments of freedom, however large or small, that your life is built on. And with that, and this is what is so beautiful about gratitude, is that you use gratitude as an antidote to fear. We think of those who've provided so many resources for us and for our freedom, and listing their names and holding them in gratitude is one of the ways we dissolve fear. But I really think the third step is this legacy of freedom, the covenantal nature of freedom to do something, to pierce our defenses and to ask, how can I invest publicly or privately in the life and well-being of others this summer? Well, Benjamin Franklin and his colleagues were often Stoics. We are gifted as Christians to look at the world from a place of duty, yes, but also a place of beauty, verve, joy, and courage. We are invited to the Spirit of Christ, who endows us, blesses us with a generous heart and a flexible mind. A generous heart and a flexible mind. Freedom from, freedom for, and freedom with. Where do you find your greatest peace and hope this summer?